Greetings and salutations, everybody. Good morning. Welcome back to class. It is another lovely and fantastic day that we get to distance learn and find out all kinds of cool and nifty things throughout history. So, over the course of this last week, we have been focusing a lot on that in-between period between World War I and World War II. One of the things that we've really hit hard on is the dictators. Okay, so we've taken a look through a couple of lessons and a couple of assignments, what it looked like to get all of these dictators into their offices. Okay, so what we're going to focus on now as we move forward here and kind of gets a couple steps closer into World War II is Hitler and Nazi Germany. Suffice to say that these are the guys that really were the big driving force of World War II, and really these guys have become really the almost the ultimate villains throughout time. When we think of something bad, we initially will kind of think back to, oh my God, this is crazy and bad as Nazi Germany. These guys were some pretty bad folks, okay? And what we're going to learn about here today is who was in charge and what did the society that they were attempting to build look like. So Hitler came up as a very young Austrian kid who had a sense for art. Okay, one of the first things that he tried to do with himself as he was kind of making that transition from adolescence to adulthood is he wanted to become an artist, first and foremost. Now, unfortunately for him, it didn't really work out all too well. Okay, we look at some of the paintings, and I gotta say, he's not too bad at what he does, but apparently the art schools did not necessarily agree. And so we have this guy who's kind of, cast out. He doesn't really know exactly what he wants to do. He wants to find some type of identity for himself, something that he can kind of use as his cornerstone to drive himself further and further. Okay, and so what he does is he enlists in the German army during World War I. And so he ends up serving 4 years on the Western Front. Now, if you guys remember, hopefully you do, the Western Front was synonymous with the trench warfare. Okay, so he was in those trenches. He was dealing with all of the gas attacks, with running through no man's land, and he managed to make it all the way through the war. Now, once the war ends, the Treaty of Versailles puts Germany in such a hard place for them to recover, economically, specifically. Okay, so there's a lot of downtrodden people. There's a lot of folks that don't have a lot of money, and there's a big question as to how are they going to run this government efficiently, and how are they going to bring people back from really this terrible economic no man's land, so to speak, that the Germans are in. And so from there, he ends up joining the German Workers' Party. So he starts off just as an everyday German citizen, and through his meetings with all of these little different groups of people, he starts to get more and more cachet. He starts to become more popular. And so he continues. He becomes a very gifted orator, somebody who can speak very well to the people. And so he gains his leadership in the National Socialist German Workers' Party, otherwise known as the Nazi Party. Now, the Nazis did not just kick the door in and take over power very easily. No, they actually had a pretty difficult time in gaining their power. They attempted at first to do it through brute force, very similar to what we saw with the Russian Revolution. They were pushing brute force by an uprising called the Beer Hall Putsch. Now, unfortunately for Hitler and his little cronies there, they ended up failing, and he was sentenced to go to prison. And now, during his time in prison, he comes up with his manifesto. He puts pen to paper and decides how his world would look if he were truly able to be in charge. he starts to try to shift the blame for who actually started World War I. And I'm sure you guys can probably guess that the Jewish faith, okay, Jewish people throughout Germany and throughout Austria, okay, these were the people that he deemed as responsible for starting this war up. Now, he puts all of this into a book called Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. So he looks at his view of the world. He tries to kind of link the idea of nationalism. Okay, so remember, we talk about nationalism, and that can kind of start off in the beginning as pride, as feeling that you are better than other folks out there. Okay, so in this case, he's trying to link this idea of pride with anti-Semitism. Okay, so anti-Semitics are people that are against the Jewish faith. Okay, so he was trying again to shift that blame away from Germany because if you remember, the Treaty of Versailles shifted that blame for the whole war, all of World War I, was now being held responsible by the Germans. Okay, so the Germans took the blame for that war. Hitler, of course, is like, nah, I don't think so. We're not the ones that really started everything. It was these pesky Jewish people. And so here's what I would do if I was put into that position of power and how I could shape the world into something better. So the beer hall push ends up landing him in prison. Hitler realizes something very important right there. You can't just walk on in and try to attain power. It worked for some. If you guys remember back when we talked about the French Revolution, that worked out pretty nicely for Napoleon. He came back from his exile. He said, hey, if you guys want to shoot me, here I am. Shoot me. And they didn't. Okay, so it's not to say that it's impossible, but Hitler realized in this case, he was no Napoleon. He was not going to be able to just walk up to the people and say, hey, I would love to be in charge of you, and I'm going to forcefully take that power. No, he wanted to attain his power legally. If you can go by the book, now all of a sudden, it kind of gives you a little bit of a different perspective. Okay, you're not looking at somebody who's going through and ruthlessly killing people. You're looking at someone who's altruistic, someone who wants better for the country, someone who promises that things are going to absolutely get better before they get worse. Okay, he was going to take Germany out of the economic slump and bring it back to its original prominence. So Hitler decides that he is going to do this legally. So the first thing he needs to do is he needs to expand the Nazi Party. So he needs to get the message out to more and more people that can relate to his struggle. Okay? And so as he does this, he kind of works from grassroots, right? He's just getting people to go door to door to hand out flyers and propaganda of sorts, kind of talking about how good he would be as the leader. Okay, so by the time we hit 1932, the Nazi Party has reached 800,000 members. And so at this point in German history, this is the largest party. So he's got kind of that household name. Now he's known by a lot of people. And so he starts to make these big promises. Okay? He promises a new Germany, something that was going to not only be as good as they were right before World War I, but even better. He wants to decrease unemployment. Once you get the people working, okay, it's important that people work because that's their way of making money. If people are working, that means that there's a lot of products out there. It means that there's a whole bunch of services. It means that you have money in your pocket to buy food for you, your immediate family, okay, even your extended family, and maybe even friends. Okay, so having an active economy was incredibly important to this push. So he is starting to try to put his money where his mouth is. And he's making things look better feel better to all of those Germans who were having a rough time throughout the course of not only World War I, but especially through the Great Depression. So this concept of the Nazi Party has now shown that it can be effective, that it can help people, and that it can help to push the economy in a much better direction. So he now is getting not only the favor of the people, but also of some pretty big wigs. Okay, some folks that are rich, some folks that have a lot of influence all throughout Germany. They're now starting to say, hey, this Hitler guy, he's not so bad. We ought to really keep an eye on this guy and maybe kind of make him a little bit more prominent and kind of listen to his ideas of how things could get better. So by the time we get to 1933, the president of Germany, President Hindenburg, okay, so he appoints Hitler as the chancellor. Now, this is where Hitler makes his move. So he, in a sense, takes the power from the president and kind of reshapes it in a way to where he is now up at the top of that food chain. He puts in place what's called the Enabling Act. This allows him to seize power, okay? Essentially taking the Constitution that they had right there and just getting rid of it completely. Now, the reason he does this and the way he presents this to the German people is if he overlooks some of these things, if he can move past some of this red tape that this Constitution is all about, then he can start solving problems faster. And again, when we're looking kind of right in there, dead in the middle of the Great Depression, relief was something that the people were so greatly wanting. So they were like, yeah, you know what? If you can get this done quicker by just overlooking a couple of things, have at it, Mr. Hitler. Enjoy, have that freedom to do what you need to do. And so he did. Now, the thing we need to remember about this and the perspective that we have to give when we're talking about Hitler is, I mean, we know through pop culture, through the TV, through news, through movies, he was a bad guy, a evil man, okay? But he did do a lot to start solving some of the issues that were present in Germany at the time. Now, does that condone anything that he did? Absolutely not. Okay? Always keep that in mind. Just because you do good for some does not condone evil acts. Okay, so he starts by bringing all of the institution under Nazi control. Okay, so they're handling everything underneath the government. Okay, they start to shut out the Jewish people. So civil service elements. So in other words, representatives within the government, okay, kind of public works places, okay, they were now being closed off to the Jewish people. Now, what he also starts to do, mostly in secret, is he establishes concentration camps. These are the camps where what we now know as the Holocaust took place, where they would take really anybody that was against their sensibilities. And so this would include Jewish people. This would include, people with really any different skin color. So, folks from African descent, okay, anybody that might be Hispanic, or really anything that was not pure white, blonde hair, blue eyes, in shape, all that kind of stuff. Okay, they would take all of these people that did not fit their concept of Aryan perfection, and we'll talk about what that is here in just a little bit. They would put those people into those camps where they would either work them to death or they would just be killed in masses. All right, so Chancellor Hitler has made some pretty big sweeping changes here so far, but one of the biggest things that he does is he abolishes the position of president. So now there's no more president of Germany. Instead, people pledge their loyalty to their Führer, which essentially means leader. Okay, so he becomes kind of the ultimate dictator leader of Germany, but he's not really wanting to stop there. But we'll get there momentarily. Now, in the last slide, I said that anybody that did not fit their look of perfection here, the Aryan race, how they perceived that the human race should be. Okay, if you weren't that, you were in a concentration camp. You were gone. Okay, so this concept of the Aryan race becomes really important here. Because not only were they killing outsiders, but they were killing people from the inside as well. So if you were somebody that was just chronically sick, you could absolutely find yourself in a position where you would end up being systematically killed in the same way that these other folks in the concentration camps were. Hitler wants to influence as many people as possible. You guys can see from the image over on the right, this is one of their rallies. So you guys can see, okay, we've kind of got the end of the path right here. And all the way through here on either side. Look at how many people were participating in those rallies. Okay, now a lot of this was that there were people at work regulating individual will by the party. Okay, so not only are they making companies kind of think along the lines of the Nazis, but they're also trying to instill that in a lot of the people as well. And while there was a lot of people that really along the same lines as Hitler and that were not very good people and believed all of these things really solidly, there were a lot of folks that were a little bit naive, that were easily convinced that this was the right thing to do. And there was also folks that actively disliked everything that was going on in Germany at that time. Okay, so it wasn't that every single person in Germany threw up the Heil Hitler and was buying into this. There was a lot of nuance, there was a lot of gray area, and a lot of people who did work to try to undermine Hitler and what the Nazis were doing. But regardless of all of that, you look at this picture and you can see the amount of people that they have in these rallies, and that's just insane how many folks were there. So Hitler realizes that he needs something to kind of keep people in line. And so they did this by creating a force called the Schutzstaffeln, or the SS. Okay, so the SS were essentially Hitler's secret police. Okay, so the SS was created by Heinrich Himmler. And essentially at first, they were kind of his personal bodyguards. But as their force grew, they started to become a little bit more specialized in different areas. Okay, so they're keeping an eye not only on making sure that Hitler was safe, but also making sure that the people were doing what they needed to do. So if you were speaking out against Hitler, if you were doing anything that was actively trying to undermine what he was trying to do, they would use either SS soldiers or their secret police force called the Gestapo to make sure that you weren't able to do much with all of your dissent. Okay, so if you're trying to get people involved in trying to protest against Hitler, you can bet that the SS or the Gestapo would get word of it, and they would absolutely persecute the person who was in charge. Okay, so overall, they want to use the SS to further the Aryan master race. So as they see people that are not fitting into that form, they would take them, they would arrest them, they would throw them in the concentration camps where, again, they would either work until they died or they would be systematically killed or, in many cases, also experimented on as human experiments. So we can see here just a little example here, one of the pictures. We've got Heinrich Himmler right here, this guy. And then we've got a prisoner of war over here. All right, so these guys would keep a lot of their POWs in some of these camps as well. Some of them were specific POW camps, but some of those folks also made them into the concentration camps as well. We can see a little bit of wartime propaganda up here, trying to get people to enlist in the SS. Now, the thing with Hitler, as a historian, it's always kind of interesting to talk about him because everybody assumes that Hitler was pure absolute evil. And he definitely was. But the guy did some good. Okay, he gets people to get back to work. Unemployment becomes practically non-existent in Germany at that time. Okay, and so not only is he getting people back to work to create public works, to create their own businesses, to try to further them on economically, but he's also going back to one of the things that was stripped away from them after World War I, and that was the concept of militarism. Okay, if you guys remember, we had our main causes. So one of them was militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Okay, so nationalism and militarism are going to be two of the big things that he puts back into practice that's going to get the people back to work. The masses are put to work in factories creating war materials. They're creating tanks. They're creating planes, bullets, anything that they might need in order to win. So 5 million people that were out of work at that point turns to 500,000. Okay, so overall, within Germany, Hitler has essentially ended the Depression. Or at least he would like everybody to think so. A lot of folks agreed with him, but for the most part, he kind of took that credit and said, yeah, go me. I win. Look what I did. I helped all of you guys. Now, Nazism was something that everybody could participate in. Now, when we look at women in Nazism, they were an incredibly important group. Now, we're not going to be seeing a lot of women that were kind of being very progressive and working in all kinds of different fields. Okay, women in this case were kind of looked at in a more traditional sense. Women are viewed as the bearers of children. And in this case, especially this early on in this Third Reich, which Hitler himself kind of talked about being a 1,000-year Reich. So it was really important that women were there, not only to, of course, have babies, okay, but they were going to be raising the next generation of the Aryan race. Okay, so these were going to be the foot soldiers. These were going to be the people that were going to bring further victory to the Nazi Party. Okay, men are destined to become warriors. Women are destined to be wives and mothers and to make sure that they're all taken care of and kind of cultivating this new culture. Okay, so women can absolutely work. They're not all just stuck completely being inside and getting pregnant and popping out kids and raising them all the time. Okay, they wanted to have women kind of working in social work, work in nursing, okay, in areas where they would be kind of using their compassion to help care for people. So, of course, we see right down here, this last part, it says, get a hold of pots and pans and broom, and you'll sooner find a groom. In other words, ladies, what they're saying is that if you're good around the house, you're going to get yourself a man. So as part of this whole thing, with Mein Kampf, with the National Socialists, okay, with this entire government, and even Hitler's rule overall, this was really contingent on one really big thing, and that was his hatred of the Jews. Okay, it's what he's going to be really known for in his legacy. He's going to be known not only for putting Jews in the position that they're in, but also killing millions of them over the course of the handful of years that he was the Führer of Germany. So it started off relatively simple. I had said a slide or so back that they started kind of pushing Jewish people out of civil service, out of politics. okay, out of kind of the front-facing public. So now they're starting to put in more laws that restrict what Jewish people can do, and these are called the Nuremberg Laws. So if you were considered a Jew, it meant that you had at least one Jewish grandparent. Okay, so you do not have your citizenship anymore after that. Your civil rights are taken away, and then you're forced to wear these little stars. You guys can see it on these guys' coats right here. These are Stars of David. And if you wanted to move about freely, you had to wear one of those on you. So this pretty much told everybody that you were a Jew, and of course, that meant that a lot of those people were very, very poorly treated throughout that time. Now, one night came along called Kristallnacht, okay, the night of shattered glass, and very aptly named because what ended up happening on that night is that there were just mobs and mobs of German kind of pro-Nazi people that were going all throughout Germany, and they were destroying and hurting anybody that was really associated with the Jews. Okay, so they were throwing bricks through windows for Jewish-owned businesses. They were beating people up in the streets. Okay, it was not exactly a really pleasant moment there for the Jewish people, but what this said was essentially, if you're Jewish, you need to get up on out of here really quick. Otherwise, you might end up with a worse fate. So they're burning down synagogues, businesses, and at that point they have 30,000 Jewish males arrested and sent to the concentration camps. Okay, those of the Jewish people that were not arrested and sent off to the concentration camps were not able to really use any of the public services, schools, hospitals. Okay, they pretty much were told to leave. So how does all of this get around? How do people hear about it? Well, they have to use what's called propaganda. We talked about this in World War I. The entire concept of propaganda is to make a person feel a certain way. And propaganda at this point in time was really starting to change quite a bit, because now not only were people looking at posters and pieces of art or anything like that, we now have radio, we now have film. Okay, so we have a visual medium to where now people can see produced movies, where they can see clips from the war itself. And with propaganda, you have to kind of edit it or shift it in a way that makes people kind of feel along the same lines as your message. So this guy right here, Joseph Goebbels, this is the guy behind the propaganda machine in Nazi Germany. So he creates a film division. So he's creating movies that are very pro-Germany. You guys have probably seen throughout your years, okay, many movies that have popped up throughout the years, not exactly that are pro-Nazi, but we see things like, Saving Private Ryan, and we see some of these other war movies, and some of them depict this concept of war and concept of fighting as something as truly noble and amazing and patriotic, whereas there's other movies that kind of take a bit of a darker look at the impact on people. So, you're kind of shaping your opinion based on what you're seeing here. And so Joseph Goebbels does a really good job of manipulating the masses. So he encourages manufacturers to produce inexpensive radios, because now everybody can hear what's going on, and more people are going to start to think more and more like them. But they have to hit a little bit further than that, too. You have to get into leisure activities. Okay? So the idea of strength through joy. So they put programs of concerts and operas and films all together with a pro-Nazi message. And probably one of the biggest things was the 1936 Olympics. So as we know, when it comes to the Olympics, you have all of the different countries throughout the world coming in, participating, seeing who is the best. And what better chance to prove how amazing Germany's athletes are than the Olympics, and showing what the Aryan race is truly, truly capable of. And so he capitalizes on that and shows the world what Germany really is. And now it's at this point that we start to see some other countries kind of raising an eyebrow what's going on with these guys? Okay, they're pushing their nationalism to a very insane degree. And they start to realize that Hitler and Goebbels and Himmler, all of these folks could very well and very shortly become a huge threat to Europe. So we can see right here, here's a couple of pictures from the 1936 Olympics. We've got the opening ceremonies where we've got the torch holder running through. And, of course, everybody in the background here. We've got all the German folks. And then, of course, the entire way lined with swastikas. And then we can also see right here, we've got a medal ceremony. And, of course, a few folks that are doing the old Heil Hitler. We've got a salute going on here for an American athlete. And then probably one of the more interesting images here, we see this mix of just Nazi flags right there with the rings from the Olympics. So Nazism has now kind of shown that it was benefiting Germany at that particular time, but it also had a lot of red flags. I guess literally, since all of these flags are red in the background, there was a lot of red flags flying around as to what Hitler was doing, how he was doing it, how he was manipulating public opinion, and what type of threat that he could be, not only for Europe, but for the rest of the world. And so it's at this point that Hitler is going to start making some big moves, and he's going to start alienating some of the nations throughout Europe. And then eventually we'll get the United States involved as well, and we'll have ourselves a new little world war. So we'll jump into that a little bit later this week. Make sure that you guys are getting all of your notes and everything done, and we will see you on the next lecture.